You're watching Badass Ladyfolk. I'm your host, Christine Stoddard. And if you're listening to our podcast on Radio Free Brooklyn or any number of other podcast platforms, I hope you eventually tune in to Manhattan Neighborhood Network, where you can watch the video and see the show fully filmed and televised. We're also on YouTube, newly, but more episodes coming soon. Today, my wonderful guests are Alyssa Meadows and Melissa Joseph.
Hi, thank you.
And I was silly to book two rhyming names, so I'm really going to be articulating your first names today.
But it makes it great because we won't forget each
I
other's
know.
names.
That's
People
right.
Call me Alyssa. Every time I say my name, they're like, Alyssa?
Both of you are visual creators, visual artists, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you together today. But I'm also speaking to both of you because of the ways in which you work with photography. So I'm going to give you like quickie impressions of your work, just my perception, what I know of your work, and then I'm going to let you speak for yourselves.
What an exciting space.
Yeah, you get to use your voices. So Alyssa is a photographer. And from what I understand of your work, you make commercial work and journalism, but you also have personal creative projects.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are more documentary and some of them are more conceptual.
Mm-hmm.
And you focus a lot on women's issues.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So how would you describe your work, like nutshell?
I summarize myself as an activist artist, and even with the commercial work, try to align myself with clients that are in that vein, and to do work that matters, no matter if it's the work for myself or work for other people. The three main focuses, like they're all within women's issues, but the three big feminist-based projects are Every Woman I Know, which is photographing every woman I personally know, which now I've met both of you. I hope you can't participate, but always available, to photograph every woman I personally know who's a survivor of sexual violence. And then the second project I did was the female experience, because when the Me Too movement resurged, it was so many men's minds were blown about it. I was like, oh, they really just don't get it. Like, they really don't understand the daily commitment and like little things we do to protect ourselves all day long, every day, the way it's an invasion of our brain on a regular basis. And so that is an exploration of that, like trying to translate what it is to be in the world of women so that, you know, we as women will relate to it, and there's that experience of familiarity for us, but also to help men across the aisle kind of get a little more insight into what that world actually is like. And then the one I'm working on now that I've been developing for the last year and a half is called Where Women Aren't As Free, and it's the ongoing battle for abortion rights in the country, and that's the documentary basis.
Thank you. That was a lot, but so succinct.
I tried really
Good
hard.
job. Now, Melissa, I have only met over Zoom before, and this was for the Tactile Arts Center. At that time, you were doing a residency, and you were, as I recall, really focused on fiber work and working with family photographs. But now it seems, and maybe this has been the case that you've always worked across media, but I'm noticing now that you're working in ceramics and using found objects and probably other things that I have not seen yet. But I'm really impressed with your beautiful felt work.
Oh, thank you so much. Felting, that was really lovely. Thank you. I started felting during that residency at the Textile Arts Center in the pandemic, and I had witnessed somebody sort of felting in the corner of my eye in the studio before COVID, and I was like, what is that? I want to do that. And signed up to take a class, but COVID came and canceled it, and I couldn't. So I just, during the pandemic, I said felting was my pandemic relationship. Like, I just, like, started watching YouTube, started felting, and then just haven't stopped, kind of. You know, it's really changed my life as far as, like, being a language and a vehicle to sort of work as an artist. But I think, like, what the work is about, it's not felt, like, it's not relegated only to felt, and it bleeds out, which I think is a big part of what my work is about. It's I think about how bodies are able to move through space based on phenotype specifically, like being brown presenting American, raised in a rural, sort of town in Western Pennsylvania. It started to and there's some things that you said that I want to go back to too. Because I feel this conversation, I'm so excited about it. There's so much nuance, and I think we're in this space in society and politics where we're trying to take these broad strokes to recover from century-long erasures, right? And it's great in theory, but it loses the nuance, and the nuance is where people really live, right? I mean, and so then you find this thing's kind of helping me, but not really, or maybe it's missing. It's missing substance or depth, and I've been struggling a lot with that and thinking about making kind of quiet work, but raging inside, and how do you I don't know join these things. I'm always thinking about it, and I think through the materials. I find answers and questions in processes in working with these things, and I've found that when I'm not trying to make grand statements, I can have kind of these breakthroughs about these nuanced experiences that are really challenging in being at any of these intersections of being a woman, of being a person of color, of being a fiber artist, of being an artist at all, of being the rural versus cosmopolitan conversation that half my life was pre-internet and half of it is post-internet. There's all of these intersections that are so that bring different things to the table, and they just smush together in the work in a way that's hard to explain, but just you feel, I hope.
Yes, you have a very clear aesthetic for sure, and themes that certainly emerge, but I think I'm very drawn to how your work looks first, right?
Yeah.
And how it feels,
Yeah.
or how I imagine it might feel.
Yeah, and when you're in the studio, you're welcome to feel them. I don't they can't unfortunately on display in spaces be feely. But yeah, I think that there's a familiarity and a softness or a beauty that is an access or an entry point for people. And so if you can help them enter into the thing, then you can have the conversation about the thing. So
Yeah. So I would love to know why photography. In Alyssa's case, photography is the medium, right? And then in Melissa's case, photography is a source material. It is the archive. It's motivation, driving concept in some ways, but material comes first when you're thinking and making. So why photography? How photography?
Well, it's a funny, when I was in for pretty much the whole second grade on to about junior year of high school, it was marine biology. I was going to be working with the manatees and rehabilitating and, all that jazz.
At the University of Miami.
That's why I went there, yep.
And that is where my uncle, Robert Ginsburg, was a professor. So I did notice that on your website.
Yeah, I finished at Penn State, but Hart stayed at Miami. It didn't. Yeah. That's why I was so much overlap.
Yeah, both of you, Pennsylvania.
that was just an hour from where I grew up.
Oh, there we go. But I took in junior year, I took a digital photography class, and that's when everything just exploded. And I didn't necessarily. It was funny, in college, I was I'm not going to take pictures of people, and now that seems to be all I do. But it's also interesting because I think photographers, and I'm curious if you've noticed this as well, that photography kind of gets relegated from the rest of the arts of there's the photography wing, whereas other mediums get shown together in more thematic spaces, and it's not so, well, we're just going to put them in the side wing over here. And I think through looking, one artist in particular, Hank Willis Thomas's work, I'm really using I want to pick his brain at some point and figure out how he's diversified beyond photography and kind of escaped the box of photographer and going back to the full scope of artist, because now I'm getting to that place of there's projects in the work, they're just not they're not released yet.
They just released another podcast, another amazing women podcast. Phyllis Hollis does Cerebral Women, and she just interviewed him. Literally, it dropped today, and I listened to it on my run. And he talks about this, and he said he was hanging out with Nikisha Durrett when he was at NYU and she was at Cooper, and she's like, you know what you call people who hang out with artists? And he's like, what? And she's like, photographers. Because he keeps saying over and over that he doesn't hang out. Like he didn't identify as an artist, right? He was doing museum studies, and then he was like studying photography, whatever. But I think like if you like, it sounds like from this interview, I don't know him personally very well, but like I think if you push him on it, he like doesn't necessarily identify with that label of artist in that way. But he does he does talk about how photography, especially now, is a way to kind of analyze objects and things in time and critically. And I think like a friend of mine just did a BFA at SVA in photography too, and he is working in textiles and other things. But I think there's a really critical lens. I was talking to another friend. Geez, I talk about this a lot. Yesterday, who's also like
so many friends.
No,
Artists are so chatty. We're just like,
I know. But I actually like can't talk about anything but art. I used to be like a well-rounded person, and I could have conversations about things that weren't art, and now that is not the case. It's
I just lost an earring. Sorry. For anyone who's watching, there's an earring.
they're really cute too.
yeah,
Yeah,
admiring.
I'm starting to like learn that a lot of these artist friends or like conceptual artist friends have a photo background. Like they started in photo, like Kembuyi Olujimi and Ezekwe Mohammed. Like they started with photo as photographers, and it somehow feels to me to be a more critical place to start in visual arts, because you're analyzing things in a different way somehow. And so Ezekwe actually just recommended to me yesterday that I should take like a photo class, like a 101 class, and just like revisit from that lens. That was so cheesy, but like for real.
Accidental pun.
Yeah.
But it's true though, because I think every medium you work with informs and influences the others, and that's why it's in your work as well, because it's, even the things that I'm working on that aren't pure photo still have photo basis. They still have photo tie-ins of like cutting negative space, and now I'm starting to play with sewing on the photos, and
Absolutely.
so I'm excited to see more of your work and learn.
Ditto.
Get some tips and tricks on the textile side of things.
Anything I can, I'm happy to help. But yeah, I agree. And I think like photo too, that's another one of these intersections where when I was a kid, everything was film and was printed. And now like to have been alive when digital photo started is really interesting, because the democratization and the dissemination of these images, it's like how many millions are uploaded every day as content, is insane to think about, when you used to have to like take this little like 35 millimeter roll to like the Dwayne Reed or whatever and wait for an hour, and get doubles so you can like give them away or cut them up. I think they are such, they're so tied, inextricably to like identity and even just the politics of like my friends who don't have any photos from when they were kids, right? They didn't have access either to the cameras or just the images aren't there. So there's so many conversations I think around like the the idea of archive that photos bring to the conversation.
Yeah, so how is it, Melissa, that you came to possess all of these family photos?
Yeah, it's interesting. We used to have a cupboard where we kept them all in the house that I grew up in, and I think this is also like a condition of diaspora. My dad came from India when he was a grown adult, like in the 70s, but his whole family stayed in India, so nobody came here. So we didn't have the family here. We didn't have community here. My mom is American. And so we had those people on that side of the family in real life. But you're constantly looking at these photos as your only way of, knowing these people out of your family. And I grew up in like a Catholic household. I'm not religious anymore. It's very important that I say that out loud because critical matters. I have a lot of the problems. Anyway. But that's where I was raised. And so, I'm learning about Bible characters, like fairy tale characters, and my long, far away family, like all at the same time. They're swirling around in my head. And always flip through these pictures. So I had them, but the house I grew up in burned down actually in like 2010. So a lot of them got lost. But I think it's because my mom was one of 9 and my dad was one of 8. There's all these tangential pictures that other relatives have that are like the same event but like a different star of like each
Different
film, you know,
perspective of
different
it, like,
perspective,
new angles to look
so we've been able to recover like through grandparents who are no longer alive, but like through all those people, I've been able to recover like a little bit of an archive. But I think it also is like partly why I'm recreating this archive too, is because I lost like a huge part of it. So.
Ooh. Fascinating. Yeah, recreating. Well, that's one of the reasons why photography seems to be separated so often, right? Because you have this, quote, objective tool, this camera that can capture these things. But we
Objective.
know,
So not objective.
we know how much we can manipulate
Yeah.
the settings on a camera and then everything that can be done afterwards, right?
Fix it in post.
Yeah.
Don't say those words to me.
Yeah. Those are scary words, bad words.
That's like uttering Photoshop on set. It's like, shh, don't. Every photographer.
Green screen this, blur that. All right, a question I ask every guest, and there's a two-parter for the both of you is, and this is almost an eye roll, but are you a feminist, and do you identify as a feminist artist?
Yeah, I would say. I was just making sure. Okay. Yeah, I definitely identify as I've identified as a feminist since college. I actually ran a blog on Tumblr anonymously because that's how I found out. Like, that's where I learned feminism and started realizing some of my own problematic things growing up in rural Pennsylvania and all the slut shaming and all the stuff that we grew up with as girls and, like, the girl hate stuff, and started breaking it down through she was called the Feminist Historian was her Tumblr handle.
That's amazing.
And she was great and I loved her, and then something happened and her blogs shifted to Brave, like the Disney movie Brave, and it was just all Brave, and I was like, but where'd all the feminist content go? And I was like, okay, there's a hole I must fill. And so I made mine, and pretty much I had feminism and photography, and they were kind of like trying, like the Venn diagram just kept bouncing off itself, and like it was like contrived, done before, not original enough, not strong enough. And then Trump got elected and it went and it became a circle instead of a Venn diagram. It's just like, oh, I get it now. I know I finally found the spark. So
It's true.
did I answer both parts of the question?
So you also, the reason I want to ask these questions separately is because some people personally identify as feminists, right? But then they don't want their work to be called feminist art.
Oh no, it's totally fine to call my work feminist.
I figured.
I think that's the only most appropriate label to put on it.
Yeah, I do too. And I also am fighting for this concept of feminism being a synonym for equality. Because
Thank
it is,
you.
right? Like, let's just call it what it is. And then we don't have to get hung up on this bullshit. Sorry, am I allowed to say that on this thing?
Yeah, okay. That's fine.
There's people are afraid to do it and to be called feminist. And so yes, my answer is yes to both questions. And I think 2016 was a really eye-opening moment for me too. It was like, wow, we are going to allow someone who speaks about women and abuses women in that way. Women are going to elect him.
Yeah. That was the most
That's
disturbing part. And
the thing.
As a white woman, I was like, how are you, all of you white girls, what are you doing?
What the actual, I can't. And yeah, so yeah, but I do have, there is this whole older generation of women who are adamantly not feminist and don't want to be called women artists or feminist artists, which fine. I can accommodate people's desires for labels. It doesn't hurt me most of the time to do that, but it is dissonant to me to think about the fact that they were even artists, women who are in their 80s now. If they're active practicing artists and were collected, regularly through their lifetime, they were feminists. They wouldn't be artists otherwise, right? And so it just, the math, it doesn't add up. But whatever, I will say fine. I don't need to call them that. But I'm happy to wear that label and hat all day.
I think there's still a big breakdown in not just within the art world, but people still have too much of the incorrect association of what the word feminist means. And to speak to where your work goes, I think it even is still inhibiting getting further along the conversation of, because I wouldn't just identify as a feminist artist. I'm very critically making sure it's intersectional feminism, not white girl feminism, because it gets, even within the subsex, gets so removed from all the white girls focusing on the white girl issues instead of the broader picture of the whole scope of it.
Yeah.
And I think when we can start getting the word feminist broken down and be more recognized and understood for the true definition of the word, then we can start opening the conversation up even more and breaking down the problematic aspects within the feminist bubble.
And I think like something you mentioned early on when you were describing your practice and like one of the series that you're doing when you talk about how men sometimes like don't understand. I
rarely understand.
Even the ones trying.
Even the ones trying. This is like where I feel like a monster because like I also am like I'm an emotional person. I'm working on it, but I will be like, rah, like that's my and I've walked away from tables. I've lost friends. I've I just like, it's like this weird, anything could trigger it. And I feel bad for the person. I am like full of like landmines when it comes to this. I can't help it. But like even people who are so kind and like sweet and really trying and maybe even like have daughters and, and they're, they feel like I'm trying to do, and you're like, but like, I guess I have to use like a real life example. Like someone said they were telling another friend who was a female, like to, that they needed to advocate for themselves more. They needed to speak up for themselves more and ask for what they want. 100% true. But like somehow the like missing acknowledgement of what that means for a woman to have to do that. Like,
and also the importance of allyship. Of
yeah.
Like, we can stand up for ourselves, but if it's a misogynist who's talking to us, there's only so much listening space, whereas if they're confronted by an ally they identify with, they're going to listen to the man say, no, don't talk to her like that.
I have always appreciated male friends and acquaintances who have quietly asked me, hey, I know you want this. Do you want me to ask for you? Because sometimes I do ask, right?
Right.
I am standing up for myself, and I'm still not being listened to.
You're still not being listened to. Maybe you're being called difficult or hard to work with or, all these other things that we have to consider. Like,
bossy and bitchy.
Bossy, bitchy. Yeah. And we can't, like, yes, we still need to ask, but we also have to consider those things. Like, they're not separate. It's like, I can't use these things as a crutch or, like, as a reason to not try to do the things that I want to do. But I also have to acknowledge them at the same time, that these are things that I'm fighting and that I'm dealing with and pushing back at me all the time. And like you said, it's like the thing you said earlier, like this thing that it's like a constant brain, like virus that's just like in your mind.
There's so much
all the
bandwidth
time.
we lose on a regular basis because we're consumed with making sure we don't get murdered, make sure we don't get raped, making sure we don't, there's a lot of thoughts that go on that you can't have other thoughts. You can't get beyond those thoughts sometimes because it's like you're walking home and it's that 25-minute walk home could be a whole like brainstorm session with myself, but instead I'm like, somebody behind me.
Yeah, totally. I can only have, no, it's totally true. Or like I can't take the train. Like I have to, like, these are things like,
God forbid we sleep on the train like the men on the train.
How do you think some of these concerns, having female bodies and being in the world, have impacted your creative careers? Like, I know I personally have not gone to residency spaces late at night unless someone I trust is there, there's a security camera, all these factors are in place, right? Yeah. So what about y'all?
For me, I just walk around with a knife all the time, quite honestly. And it's great because it's a Leatherman, which if any police officer stops me, I'm like, it's a tool for work. No questions asked, but I know I have a knife and I also always have a lighter because set them on fire. So that's kind of, I'm very much like, I've already been assaulted before, not in a street situation with like the back alley stereotype that we all think of sexual assault as. But once you've experienced things, you kind of just, I feel like after a certain point, you just take the initiative to be like, I'm not going to let that happen again, and I will be prepared for it. And you can't, I don't let it stop me, but that doesn't mean it doesn't eat at my
100%.
awareness on a regular basis. Going to I go everywhere I need to go, and people think I'm crazy for it, because I hike alone, I camp alone when I'm doing the abortion project, and every woman I know, I'm going and sleeping in my car, and people are like, "You sleep in your car with all the truckers?" And I'm like, "Yes," and they're fucking creepy. And that's why I have a knife and a hammer and a hatchet.
Wow. Yeah. I mean,
so
wow.
but luckily I haven't had to use any of it. But that's my
Well,
Yet.
and I
yeah,
think
exactly yet.
and you touched on something there, which is like a lot of the damage and that is done to women is actually like at home. Like in these like familiar environments, whether it's emotional or physical, like it's done like when we have our guard down or when we should be safe. So it's hard to protect against it, and it's hard and so yeah, I understand the impulse 100% to do that. Like I forget what the question was, but like I hate
Going to
hearing these
spaces,
stories.
does it limit you?
Oh.
Going out in the world, in the art world.
Yeah,
is my
or
interpretation.
even with anything else.
Yeah.
in terms of buying supplies, mounting exhibitions, speaking to curators, working with art professors, visiting schools, any of these situations where as professional artists and as women you have to take so many things into consideration that if you were a male artist, you probably would not think about.
Yeah, I think it bleeds so much into like every action, art or non-art. I mean, I think being women artists is a radical act. I've said that before, and I think because statistically, we shouldn't be able to be here. I mean, like, it's abysmal, the numbers, and it just doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. So, I think it's important. I think staying active and continuing to like work toward these things that we hope to see or wish we could see or just that we want to do, just like having dreams and then pursuing them, or goals and pursuing them, is I'm always thinking about it. I know if I were a man making textile work, it would be like people go crazy over men making textile work, right? Like it's like, oh my God, have you ever seen a quilt before?
He's so in touch with his feminine
I
side.
know. Like I'm like, oh my God, yeah. So right, and then like, but then beyond that, it's like people are like, there's a study they did, and I can't remember when. Or where. So this is like
Something
one
depressing.
of those. Somebody told
But
me.
it's in your brain.
It's in
locked
my brain.
there.
I can look it up and probably
Sad
find.
statistics somewhere.
Yeah, I know, right? That old chestnut. It's that people devalue work as soon as they think it's made by a woman. So they did a blind study and they told people like a man made this and a woman made this, and they value it less. And people will say, like, I experience these things where people like, they are like, oh, I can't afford it, or oh, I oh, that's like so expensive. And my work is like, I mean, it obviously we're talking about like the fine art world, and this is a luxury commodity at this point. But compared to other people making work the size of mine, my work is cheap, right? And so they like it's just like this thing that and you see it as you go all the way up, and like that someone will pay this much for a Van Gogh and this much for a Julie Maretu, and it's like what is going on here? Like and controversial statement alert.
No, I love it. Here for it.
Like women artists are so fucking good. Like they're
what's
so
controversial about that?
Sounds pretty objective
controversial
to
at
me.
I think any man would say that very confidently and not feel the need to disclaim that.
Thank
so,
you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Male artists are so good.
But
Some are.
But I'm glad you brought up that point, though, because that's actually why my Instagram handle is what it is. It's A Meadows. I intentionally don't have, and that's why my website is A Meadows, because I don't want you to know it's Alyssa right away.
Yeah.
I didn't know, like, thank you for teaching me something in this, because I didn't know it's an automatic devaluation of the work. But there is that, like, attempt to gently do a slight erasure of dead giveaways, because we know the resume studies of if it's a woman's name versus a man's, or a
Writers.
like an ethnic name,
Oh,
like a very
of course. Yeah.
strong indicator of ethnicity name versus like Jose versus Joe, and how the resume does significantly better.
Yeah.
So there are those little almost like self microaggressions against our own identity, to make sure it's not used against us by somebody else.
And that's almost like bringing up microaggressions is interesting because like it's kind of like that's what it is. It's like I feel so on edge because it's so many like small things. Like it's endless. It's endless. It's a comment here. It's a look here. It's a devaluation here. It's a I don't know, an assumption here. And all of a sudden, like, yeah, you're losing so much valuable space and time and self in these like attempts to defend against it.
So how do you take up space? How do you dream? How do you dare to make things and put them out into the world?
I've just accepted that if they like it, they'll like it, and if they don't, too bad. I'm just going to do it anyway. And like with the abortion project, I antagonize them back. I use my camera as a weapon. I'm like, I'm gonna get right in your face.
So could you describe more what that
what's that?
project
Yeah.
is? So online, I saw photos from a Planned Parenthood or of a Planned Parenthood in Texas. Are there more photos?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It has, because when I started it, I was actually on the road with some commercial work, and the Texas ruling came out. And we were in Louisiana at the time for the one, because it was going to different colleges with this photo company. And I was like, well, I have to drive from Louisiana to El Paso anyway, and I have a couple days, so we're just gonna do some stopping along the way and document it. And what was really interesting was that some were already gone, and it was like a week later. It wasn't even that long, and one was already gone. And so I did Texas, and I did a New Mexico clinic then as well to try to see what was happening with the overflow, right?
Yeah.
The spillage that's happening now of women, going from Texas to Louisiana, and then and then Louisiana over to Mississippi. Like, it's this cascade effect that's happening now. So I started it that way, and then I was on the road again working on Every Woman I Know when the SCOTUS leak,
Which is the sexual survivor project, right?
Yeah. So and the Supreme Court ruling leak happened while I was on the road, and I was like, well, fuck, I guess I have to start doing the whole fucking country now.
Yeah.
And so on the way home,
Sadly,
I just started going. I built a Google map and tracked every single clinic across the whole country. I look like a neurotic human being, and I kind of am. It's fine. But I just was like I built the whole map out and just looked for every single clinic that was on my route on the way back, and hit more Texas clinics, the one clinic in Mississippi that is now gone, New Orleans and Baton Rouge, just did Chicago. Haven't done it here yet, or Pennsylvania, but that's going to be the next step to explore how our home state is becoming the new battleground state, because they're coming for us, and we know it, and they're trying to act like, oh no, Pennsylvania's fine, you're good, and we're like, we know what's up. This is just like when you told us this wasn't going to happen at all. And just to have a little rant for a second, I'm so angry. I'm still not over it. I don't think I ever will be. How everybody, when the 2016 election happened, I was screaming at the top of my lungs, it is not about Trump. It is about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And if you do not understand that, you have your head buried in the sand. And what was the word they all used for us? Hysterical.
Our favorite.
Yeah, because that's not super sexist to use as a word with its etymology and all that jazz. But to have to sit back and go, we told you. We fucking told you 5-6 years ago that this was going to happen. And now they're doing it again. But your state's safe. But your state's fine.
No.
They're not going to get you here. And it's like, if you really are going to repeat the same mistake again, you're dumber than you think you are. Like, please get with it, for the love of God.
Yeah. No, but this is where we need people to understand feminism as equality, because they don't, like, the impetus to control women's bodies is like, it's just like it's like the gateway, right, to like total totalitarianism. I mean, there is no stop break. Like, I think, like, I don't understand how, and I really don't, because I haven't studied like social science, like anthropology or sociology. Like, I don't understand necessarily like the large picture about socio-cultural movement. I just witness it and cringe most of the time. But like like for me, and I'm someone who doesn't have like crazy foresight or critical like understanding of these things. It's very clear to me that if you start to police bodies, then it never ends.
Right.
It never, ever, ever ends. And I think like so now people are being surprised about like what's happening with critical race theory in schools, or like LGBTQ rights being taken away, people not like First Amendment rights being taken away, and not like, and it's like, it's absolutely 100% tied to abortion. So if you didn't understand that, like, I'm sorry for you, because you could have been helping us fight harder for this. But like, it doesn't stop. It's gonna be like, yeah, like, we're not so far from some of these countries. Like, Iran used to be like, Persia was cool. Like,
I mean, just look at how quickly, in the span of 2 years, Afghan women have gone from being very, not that equality was met there, but they went from up here all the way down there,
change.
and just how fast, and watching what's happening in Iran, the same thing.
Yeah, it's fucking insane, and I can't, like, I'm tired. I feel like helpless and hopeless sometimes. It just doesn't make any sense. It's like, what is even happening? I don't know. I don't know what to do about it except rage.
Well, I think there's also the point of education, because I was like, it was probably 2-3 years ago. It's not common knowledge. It's not what we're educated on, that women couldn't have their own bank accounts until the 1970s.
Yeah.
And now,
or their own passports.
So I didn't know that one.
Well, women in the U.S. could have passports before, but like in India, when my dad came in the 70s, women still couldn't have their own passports.
And that, I think there's this, like, people wanted to think women had more freedoms earlier than that, because if we had Martin Luther King before the 70s, why would women be so far behind in their minds is the thought process. And it's when you think about, my mom was in her 20s in the 70s. So for me, it's like, we're really the first generation growing up with much more full autonomy. And I think that's why abortion is becoming such a battleground space, because men are realizing, if we don't trap women into being financially dependent and capable of building their own lives without us, they won't put up with our shit. And they don't like us enough to be with us. Because what are they saying? Women are ruining the the institution of marriage now. And it's all, I think it's all stemming from the realization that boys have to change their methods, like men have to grow up and start really putting forth equality if they want to have a female, for straight men, if they want to have a female partner that stays with them. And because I know I have very, very strict limits on what I'll put up with in a relationship.
Well, it's the whole system, right? I mean, you started by mentioning little boys, and it starts there. And unfortunately, I'm not saying a 75-year-old man shouldn't change his ways, but when someone gets to a certain age, it's not so likely that they're going to reverse some of their ideas.
Well, and like, I don't know if you guys read that book, Invisible Women, but like, it's so baked into not just like the mental like schemas that we have, but like even the physical schemas, like the size of this microphone, the size of and height of a doorknob, like the dosing for medication, seat belts, everything is built for like a standard, whatever that calls, like male body. And so, it
is that something that you find even working with various textile tools, or are those more designed
really
for female
bodies?
Right?
Probably, I would imagine, yes, they are, but I haven't done research on that. But I built a table, I designed a table for my own body and asked a friend to build it. And then, like the needles, the wool. Yeah, but the other tools, yeah, probably. I mean, it's just something that's like, it's so embedded, it's so ingrained into things that again, it feels like it would be very easy to like do medical trials on men and women, but a lot of the scientists, including sometimes women, are like, but we can't use the women as much of a control because their hormonal changes like make it more difficult to know what the like right what is the where's the impact coming from and stuff like that. And you know, like that kind of stuff, which is insane. But that was also like a racial thing too. It's funny, I just had this like conversation yesterday, so it's all fresh in my mind because I have
With another one of your friends, Melissa. No, but I did want to have you, Melissa, answer the question of how do you keep creating? How do you keep going? You're so prolific. Why? How do you find the energy? Aren't you just exhausted and sad all the time?
Yes, I am. I am exhausted, and I'm angry, and I'm sad, but like if I don't do anything, it doesn't change either, right?
Exactly.
So like it's either I get up and I go to the studio, or I get up and I jump in front of a train because like I can't get up and just not do anything at all.
Using that anger and sadness as fuel instead of
Yeah.
just burning yourself up inside.
Yeah, and I think like I can't just think that it's nothing is all good or all bad, including this, like right, like this is happening, and these are true things in my view of like the state of things. However, you know, there are beautiful things happening in the world
Yes.
too, right? And like those things are inspirational, and so yeah, like you know, it's finding the way to kind of balance and like find a way for them to like coexist and like figure out a path of existence and meaning in between them a little bit. And so that's what the practice is for me, you know, and I can do this work that I hope is meaningful, but then the work itself, like, you know, I'm starting to like, this is the first year that museums are starting to like acquire my work. And so like, that's a thing. Thanks. It's like, they're having a space, they're having like an institutional space, a space that has historically been denied to like imagery like that and people like me. And right now, I think most museums, like if you go like across the country, right, like 85% of the work is by men. And then of the 25% that's not by men, like 3 to 4% is women of color. Mm-hmm. So like the numbers are still really, really tough. So that's like, you know, these kinds of things are drivers for me. I know that I'm able to be doing what I'm doing. I love my practice so much. Like what a gift to like have this be my life, right? So these kinds of things, I have to also honor the joys and like the gifts of that life has, in addition to these other super shitty truths. But I am here because people before me were like doing work like me and not getting visibility, not having platform, not having the space or anybody looking or buying the work. And so even though it looks like in the rest of like, because I'm half dead, so like looking at like my lifespan, like it's not going to change that much before I'm out of here. But like hopefully the work I'm doing will make space before we become Iran for the next like generation, right? Like I hope that, because I know some of the women whose shoulders I'm standing on, and some I don't, but like, you know, and I'm so grateful to them that the work that they did, thankless work, with like the reward of like their communities and friendships and knowing that they built something that we could grow, but without the actual like recognition that they deserved. So.
Right. Which leads me to my next question is, how have other women supported you? And this is a chance to shout out any relatives, teachers, professors, friends, whomever.
I mean, every woman I know is all the women in my life, and genuinely I am woman number one in the project because I didn't feel right asking anybody else to participate if I didn't know what it was like to go through the process myself. I thought it was only fair, but that would just be a single self-portrait and we'd be done. And there is no project without all of the other women and hearing their stories and having their voices contribute. And they are now collectively we're working on things together, figuring out how to have a support network, how to affect the legislation. So I would be thanking all the women in my project, and just that's probably the biggest focus I have personally. I don't know about you, but.
Yeah. There's a lot,
There's
I
are
have-
we going the ones we don't know? Like
I
political
know, right?
figures? Like, thank you, Ruth, for
Yes.
fighting for us back then.
Thank you, Ruth.
Just
I wish you
whomever.
didn't die.
Yeah.
I have 11 aunts,
Oh.
and they're like all powerhouses in different ways. But it's also just been like a really good, I don't know, what's it called? Influencer or something. I'm sorry, I'm having like a weird brain moment. But
No, it's all right. They also gave you so many photos.
I know. I think there are so many. There's an artist here in the city, Jayshree Abachandani, who's been like working, like curating. I've heard people say to her, like, I didn't know I could be like an Indian or South Asian, I think, like artist until I saw you doing it. Like, so that was like, I think she's been a big one. I had a nun that was my art teacher in Pennsylvania, and she's still alive. She's like 90, and she's like this big, and she like let me be an artist, So I think nuns, man, that's another
There's
some
podcast.
of them-
Catholicism coming
That's-
back
Some of
in.
them are incredible.
That's
but-
another podcast, yeah. This one was really great, and her name is Sister Mary James, and she's in Bakerstown now because they had to close the convent that was in the town where I grew up. But my mom and my sister, like my sister's one of these people who the best thing the universe ever did was give me a registrar as a sister, because like my brain is a train wreck and hers is very organized. It's like so, and she just like is such a great like support. So like she's been great. My mom, like I have a best friend that I've had since I was 2 years old. I have to tell you,
Precious.
I wrote my college application essay about her because if you have a friend like that, like a ride or die, you get so much freedom. There's so much freedom that comes from the support. And so then from her, I would like extrapolate to like the women, strong women friendships that I continue to cultivate, that are so important. Because I think we do need this. We need this community of people who can relate to these issues and understand when we're having these meltdowns or these frustrations or these like fits of anger or sadness. And so, yeah, like Shelley was my best friend, and then just like I have like an army of amazing, strong, amazing women that I, reach out to on a regular basis. And I'm grateful for all the time. Yeah, I think like that's the only way through. There's the only way to do this. So,
What sort of support would you like to see more of for female artists in New York City?
I think it starts from the top down. If there's not enough leadership in the arts that are women, because when you asked that question, I was like, well, all my mentors have pretty much been men, whether it's high school, college, post-college. The trade associations I belong to are predominantly male. And they're not to say there aren't women in those spaces and that they're not badass ladies, like my friend Sherry and my friend Frances and my friend Julie. But I feel like there's still not enough female curators in general. And
well, they're just not in those high positions. Like, can the Whitney find one more white dude to run shit? Honestly, like, I'm so, what the anyway. There are millions of women curators that are amazing. But yeah, like gallery ownership.
Exactly.
We need more gallery ownership. We need more women like directing and like being chief curators in these spaces. And there have been some, but the problem is it's not about some. It's about 50-50. Like, if you're going to curate a show, and it's a group show, half of the artists should be women identifying. Like, that's that's it. It's so easy. It's so easy. If you're going to have a residency, half of the participants should be women identifying. Half of the teachers, half of the instructors, half of the mentors should be women identifying. If you look at like the breakdown of C-suites, it's not happening. It's not. And
it's also in that space of, I feel like, especially in male-dominated fields, it's like they just find one woman, and then she becomes the famous one, and then it's like, okay, we met our woman quota.
Yeah.
Because, like, everybody knows Annie Leibovitz, but other female photographers, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's, and it doesn't matter if it's Megan Rapinoe and Mia Hamm. Like, I was just having this conversation with my friend because my friend Nicole finds all these really good erasures of women from history, and she's been sending me these clips of, like, female drag racers and female race car drivers, and she's like, why aren't there stories about them? I'm like, because once they have one, they're done. And
they're like, okay, we did this.
that's what they do. Like, literally, when Nikon did a campaign, this is legitimately the reason I stopped using Nikon. I was like, I'm done with you. Done. I'm selling my Nikon
I also
equipment.
don't even like my Nikon,
No,
by the way.
no,
I like Canon better.
No, I'm a Sony gal now, and because Sony actually supported the genesis of every woman I know, so I'm like ride or die Sony now.
Okay.
Because Nikon also sold me 2 lemons in a row, and then talking about sexism, they implicated that I didn't know how to use my camera.
Ooh.
I'm like, I did your fucking they told me to do this test with a cup and all these pencils in it.
Did you turn it off and turn it back on?
Yeah, they literally did, like, they tried to implicate I didn't know. And I was like, I did the test you told me to do. It proved exactly what I told you is happening, and you still are implicating that I don't know how to use my camera? Are you fucking kidding me? And so I was already pissed, to be fair. But then they did this campaign of, it was either 40 or 41 masters in photography. I think it was 41. And part of their excuse at the time was that it was the Asia-India market, as if that somehow makes it okay. 40 male portraits,
Oh my God.
1 woman. And they sat there and looked at it, and nobody noticed that there was an imbalance. And it was all, I don't remember.
I know, like, that's the thing. No one, how is
Yeah.
no one checking, how is no one checking this stuff?
Yeah,
Like,
and I tagged them on Instagram. I was like, hey, guys, and, like, total crickets. I was like, you don't need any more. I'm done with you. Over.
Yeah.
Canceled.
No, I mean, this is the thing. It's like, it really,
It's discouraging, to say the least.
Yeah, and I think, like, so what would we like to see? We would like to see equality.
So
Like,
besides
right?
having more women in these spaces, in these positions of power, what do you want from the male leaders who are already there? What sort of
Retire.
support? Retire. Go.
Down.
True allyship. Real allyship.
So what does that
Because
mean?
I think a lot of men, there's a certain trade association that I will never be a part of again for this reason. Because everybody loved to talk the talk. Our next female president. Our next female president. And then, because they loved my feminist rage when it was outward at the world and being like, yeah, go girl, go. But as soon as I turned it inwards on the leadership and I was like, there's some really big issues internally here about not taking sexual violence stuff seriously, not, abuse of female interns, things of that nature. And it ultimately landed with them turning me into the scapegoat and throwing me under the bus and saying things like they said I said things I didn't even say, and they tried to turn me into a white Karen. When it's like, motherfuckers, I am the loudest about intersectional issues, and I am like, I fight, like, the fact that it was such a blatant trying to spin it, that there's a lot of men like to do the lip service, but when it actually comes down to it, like, those same men who gave me the lip service also turned me around and said, what happened to you wasn't rape.
Jeez.
And I'm like, you think you're in a position to tell me whether or not that was rape? I know what it was. I decide that. That's not up to you. You listen and you accept. That's it. And the fact that it got spun so severely, and they're still friends with that person, says a lot about how far the industry's, whether photography or the art world in general, because I think you could experience that just as much in the textile bubble as I could in the photo bubble. I don't think it's a photo-specific problem at all.
Yeah.
So.
And I think, like, it's hard to say what we need to have happen. Like, what we need is education, and we need it, like, across the board. But no, people aren't really investing in education. Like, there's people who are, like, clearly benefiting from not having people that are well versed in like these things and these concepts and these conversations. And they're also not easy conversations to have in an increasingly polarized space, like echo chamber space. There are fewer spaces where you can actually find people with differing opinions, like living together and having a conversation. I think, you know, we really are siloed. And so it's, I wish I knew. I think, like, you know, people talk about, you just keep doing this, living like your authentic life, saying your authentic thoughts, and sometimes on TV and radio, and then you never know where it will go. Sometimes it's like, you know, but yeah, I think it's like it's gonna, it didn't start, like, it didn't just come overnight, and it won't go overnight. I can't say I'm hopeful it'll ever be gone, but I would love to think it could one day be gone, that we could we could have more systems in place. I think, you know, places like Project Empty Space are trying to do stuff like that are productive, that are calling attention. They have a Badass Women Awards dinner. I think like places like AIR, Air Gallery Residency Fellowship, like those kinds of places are trying to like make spaces like that. But I think what can happen is we need mainstream to be in those spaces too, right? It's great that those things are happening and that those things are existing, but we need the overlap of like the mainstream with those things, so that that's where the education happens. And if it's not happening, then it's harder for that. Like, we don't have a women's museum here. There's the National Women's Museum in DC, but why don't we have one here in New York?
Right.
Like,
the contemporary art hub.
Yeah, seems like we could fill it.
We are running low on time, and I did just want you to quickly plug any projects you have going on, talk about what you're excited about these days before we wrap up.
You go first.
All right,
Yeah,
go
think
first.
about it.
Okay. I have a solo show coming up in October 27th at Margot Samuel Gallery in Tribeca. So I'm very, very excited about it. It's called Irish Exit. And then I will be doing a residency in San Antonio next year early called Art Pace that I'm excited about. So those things are on the horizon, and hopefully I'll have some more things to share, you know, in the future. But they're the big things that I'm working for.
And these are for fiber-based projects or other types
No,
of
just
work?
mix. There's always going to be fiber if I'm around. So.
And what about you, Alyssa?
Oh, that's why I let you go first, because I forgot. I'm in an exhibition right now, too, so thank you for
Amazing.
reminding me. Called Darken Lightly, that's over in Long Island City right now. You know Audra? Yep. And that's how I know Natalie. Well, I knew her before that, but that's where we saw each other recently.
She's
And
great. She's
Natalie
another great.
Bravo was the one who recommended Alyssa to me for this project because we both went to the City College of New York.
Yeah.
And we showed at the Queen's Botanical Garden at the same time.
And I love her Argentinian. If you're not familiar with her work, I'm going to plug Natalie for a second because we give her all the credit today. She has a project based on cyanotype work that are she makes these flowers that are representative of femicide, all the femicides in 1 year in Argentina, and it's just the most beautiful. That's where she and I originally connected, and it's such a beautiful project.
That's beautiful.
But her other work is also in the show with me in Long Island City, and just a general. One thing I've noticed with every woman I know is, while I love the theme and the approach I've taken with it, I didn't realize when I started it how healing it was going to be for the participants, as well as for myself, because they share their story with me, I share my story with them, and there's this lightening of spirit and soul that happens from getting it off your chest. And while I love it being every woman I know personally, that also limits how many women have access to that healing. So I now am planning on opening it up in the future and making it come to me, tell me you want to participate. If you want to be in that space, I'm here. I'm on Instagram. You can email me. You can instant message me.
And all
I'm
the
there.
contact info will be in the show credits. That is all the time we have. Thank you so much, Melissa Joseph and Alyssa Meadows. I'm your host, Christine Stoddard. You've been watching Badass Lady Folk or listening. You can do both. Until next time.